Hey, welcome back. And if you're new here, my name's Christina Kent, and I'm an artist based out of San Francisco. And today I'm going to walk you through my process of working on a large triptych landscape painting. This is my biggest, most ambitious piece to date, and I am so excited to share the process with you. This painting was a collaboration I was doing with an interior design firm for an office space. And the firm was really interested in a landscape that depicted the Northern California hills, beautiful, expansive skies, and yeah, just the kind of golden landscape of Northern California. I was super excited to work on this piece because it's a landscape I feel really connected to. And also, taken together, these three paintings, would be the largest kind of single piece that I'd worked on. So I just couldn't wait to work on this big, ambitious project. But working on a triptych this large was definitely a challenge for me, so I wanted to document the process and share some tips that I found to help make it a bit more manageable. I decided to start out with the painting treating it like it was all one large canvas, so I set all the canvases together on the floor to make sure that the images on each lined up. I started the paintings as I usually would by putting in a base layer of neutral brown, doing my underpainting in this neutral brown color. But then instead of going straight to the full painting process, I decided to put a thin layer of color onto all the canvases. And the reason kind of for doing this was that I wanted to make sure that the colors were all working together, like the basic colors of the paintings would work together before I really got into putting in thicker paint with more detail, with more texture and complexity. I used the same technique when preparing the large scale paintings for my solo show. And this is one thing I've noticed with working on larger paintings is that sometimes it can be hard to tell how the painting is working as a whole because it takes so long to just fill the entire canvas with color. So I decided I would start off by adding this thin layer of color and then I would go in with the thicker paint on top of this thin layer once it had dried. So as I'm painting in this thin first layer, I'm trying to get the colors right, but I'm not worried if they're exactly right. I know I'll be able to tweak the colors a little bit as I add on the thicker paint. I just want to get a general idea of how they'll look and how they'll work together. I also am not concerned too much about getting all of the shapes perfectly drawn in because, like I said, when I add in the thicker paint, I know that I can adjust things. The whole point right now is just to get a basic idea of how the painting might look from sort of a more simplified standpoint. Are the colors working together? Are the overall shapes working together? Oh, and if you're wondering why I have the paintings on the ground, it's because I only have one easel and it's not large enough to fit these three canvases. So I just finished putting down a very thin layer of paint of the basic colors for this triptych. And then what I'm going to do next is I'm going to give this some time to dry, and then I'm going to go and put in the thicker paint kind of one at a time. So you can see, even with just this thin amount of paint on the canvas, you can get a good idea of how the final paintings might look and how they'll all come together. After the first layer has dried, I start to lay in the next layers of paint. And I decide for the colors of the golden fields, I want to go a little bit darker than the first base layer that I put down. I decided to make it a bit of a richer, almost like a terracotta, like a reddish brown tone, so that when I put the golder, yellower tones on top, they'll really have this nice warm tone to contrast, and it gives you a sense of this kind of very warm shadow in the fields. And you can see here that I'm working with pretty large brushes. I switched from my usual synthetic flats to these large, very cheap, I think they're called chip brushes. They're these like very cheap bristle brushes, but they're able to get a lot of paint onto the canvas, and you can put a lot of pressure on them to really move the paint around. So I really like that for these larger paintings, and I found it's just so helpful in translating my style to have much larger brushes for these large paintings. Because in all my paintings, large or small, I like to be able to see the brush strokes. I like to be able to see the marks created by the brush. And so for larger paintings, that means larger brushes. As I began feeling more confident about the colors and the way that the paintings were working with each other, I was able to start working on them one at a time so I could work on them from my easel, which was a lot more comfortable. I started working on the colors and the shapes of the stormy clouds in the sky, and these are one of the things that I really liked about this motif, is that it had these big billowy clouds that had this just feeling of expansiveness. And so I decided to first put them in with the brush, kind of trying to get the colors in, trying to get a lot of paint onto the canvas, and then I could go in with my palette knife to move the paint around to add more texture. After finishing the sky, I was pretty happy with the middle painting of the triptych, and so I decided that I would continue that approach for the 2 remaining paintings. Also, one thing I hadn't fully realized until doing this was just how much paint you need to work on large paintings. I mean, of course I knew it would take more paint to work on a bigger painting, but I didn't have really an idea of just how much paint that was. I felt like I was spending so much time mixing paint for these pieces, and it actually ended up inspiring me to create a larger palette for paint mixing that I could use to work on these large scale pieces. But yeah, I noticed if I didn't mix enough paint, or if it's very physical, the act of mixing paint. It takes a lot. And if I underestimated the amount of paint I needed, and if I mixed too little, then I would end up painting really thinly on the canvas, and I wouldn't be able to get the same texture, the same brush marks that I like to have in my smaller pieces. So I think that was one big takeaway for me, is that it's really important to mix a lot of paint to create an interesting surface of these large-scale paintings. So I'm back in the studio today, and I'm going to be working on the commission again, the triptych. As you can see behind me, I have them on the floor so that I can kind of see how they look next to each other, since they don't all fit on my easel. And I'm going to be painting in the sky. So this one's pretty much done, but the 2 next to it still need some work. So I'm going to be painting in the sky on these other 2, and then I think maybe I'll just need some finishing touches, and then I'll be ready to wrap it up. Here I'm scraping off my palette, making space to mix the colors for the sky. So I'm removing all of the colors that I'd mixed for the field and the trees, and I start to mix a lot of grays and whites and creams for those clouds. As with the middle painting of the triptych, I start by putting in all of the colors with the brush and really trying to lay on a lot of thick paint onto the canvas. Once I have a lot of the colors and shapes right and I've added it with the brush, then I get my extra large palette knife and I start moving the paint around to create interesting shapes and textures. I use the palette knife both to scrape away paint where there's too much, to add more paint where it's too thick, and to mix paint around to create really interesting shapes and effects. And here's how the paintings turned out in the end. I really liked how the colors were all working together, how we got a sense of these large luminous clouds, the blue mountains, and the golden fields in the foreground. I also liked the combination of the rougher texture created by the palette knife and the soft brush strokes, and how those work together in creating the texture of the fields, the trees, and the clouds. And here you can see the paintings hanging together, giving you a panoramic view of the Northern California landscape. So that's all I have for today. Thanks so much for watching, and I really hope you liked this video. Let me know what you thought of it in the comments. And as always, a huge shout out to my supporters on Patreon. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much for supporting this channel and making these videos happen. If you like my art, if you like my videos, and you want to help me make more, check out my Patreon at the link. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.